So I was like, Dad, I got to come clean. And I told him about the accident and that a woman had passed away. Let me rephrase that. I killed a woman in a car accident because of my terrible decisions. I tend to say a woman passed away in the car accident, and I feel like that's a way to soften my responsibility. I killed somebody in a car accident, and that's what happened.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Two Dudes, One God Pod. I'm Trey. I'm here with
Pat Lacey
and
Troy Coleman.
So we've been looking forward to this. I've kind of gotten to know Troy just a little bit, like Freedom Weekend. And
Also, Troy is kind of one of the people that, you know, gives good critiques about the podcast.
Yeah,
that
100%.
I think me and you really trust on.
Dude, he was instrumental, I would say, in the first couple episodes. I was like sending things to him, and he was like, "No, that sounds good." And
well, I'll say though, it really meant a lot that you reached out to me about that. Like, as soon as we talked that one night about you doing it, I was like, man, any way I can help would definitely love to do it.
Well, you were at the Freedom Weekend that Pat and I decided to start this at, which is wild.
That's
and like
right.
we already have a new sign up sheet for the next Freedom Weekend, and I'm like sending the link. I got one guy to sign up.
Heck yeah.
Wild. I've been trying to get him to sign up for like at least 2 Freedom Weekends.
That's awesome.
Third time's a charm.
Yeah.
I'm definitely gonna go be on the other side of it this next time because it was super transformative. And I'll say before we really get into it, I'm really grateful that y'all invited me. This church is an incredible place. This podcast is so interesting to me because there are so many dynamic personalities that are in this church. And I mean that. Like, and it's funny because I made jokes before about how everybody's named Cody and everybody has a beard and there's a lot of like East Texas like personality here, but there's just so many interesting people I've come across, and I think y'all are tapping into something that's very interesting, and I think it's revealing itself so far. So
Man, I appreciate
I'm a little intimidated to be following up Steck. I told you I called it the Steckisode, and also Casey Parker, David Wise. Like, there's just so many people here that I think it's such a cool idea because it's helping us to get to know each other better. And I just, I listen to a lot of stuff on the Pray.com app, and that stuff's been great, but it's like when I was in Austin and I was involved in the arts community, being involved like at the ground level on like DIY stuff, that's like where it's at. And so this is an element of that I think is really awesome. So I want to, give a little props to y'all for this. It's really cool.
Thank you.
Right on. Hopefully it's not too polished or too crusty.
Yeah.
No, it's great. I think we need it for sure. I've lived in Tyler a little over a year now. My parents have lived here for 17 years.
Okay.
And they moved from the Woodlands when I was a junior at UT in Austin. So I'm familiar with the Tyler area, been familiar with for a while, but always from a very cursory level, holidays and stuff like that.
You would come visit and you were like, wait a minute, they don't sell beer at the gas station?
I remember that, yeah.
Past midnight?
No, at all.
Yeah.
Which was, for a time, very problematic for me, which we'll get into. But
How old are you?
I just turned 39 on December 28th.
Dude, I'm older than you.
Yeah, I know. I look like Father Time.
I'm the oldest guy in the room.
But it's an interesting story of what got me here, and I've been going to Wilderness since the summer, and I really feel like there's a unique vibe here. It's great. So let's get into it. My whole family were originally from Wyoming.
Wow.
Okay.
Whoa.
I was the last person born there. Lived there for 18 months, then we moved to California. My dad was in oil for basically his whole career, so we chased that around.
In California?
There's a lot of oil in California.
Bakersfield, California.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, dude, I rolled through Bakersfield last summer, and I was like, this isn't what they show on the movies.
It's like it's the most Texas city in California for sure.
Well, it looked exactly like everything after we passed Fort Worth until we got to San Francisco or something.
Right. It's a little bit of a anti-oasis, I would say.
Yeah, it is a desert for sure.
So, but the reason why I say that is I remember my first experience with God and Christianity was when I was living in Bakersfield, and I wasn't really raised in a church home, not really raised around Christianity, and there was some neighbors on a street, and they were very like squeaky clean, kind of really weird Christians. Like I remember, like I always just thought they were so strange.
California Christians.
I mean, it was just bizarre, and so that kind of painted the perception I had about Christianity, about God, for a good while. And then when I was 10 years old, we moved to the Woodlands, Texas, where I spent most of my time.
Shock, huh?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was really strange because, you know, we were always kind of pretty like modest people, and going there was all this opulence, and I don't know, it was wild. I felt like a fish out of water most of the time going to school there. But in, let me see, summer before 8th grade, I went to a church camp on a whim called The Edge. Matt Chandler was the pastor there, pretty well known. And I remember he really struck the fear of God into me in a good way. And I was all in. I was all about it. I kind of really figured out my purpose for a time, to a point where for the next couple of years I was preaching to our youth group. I was
guy?
Yeah, that's Matt Chandler.
Oh, dude, I think I've seen something with him.
Yeah, I know who he is.
Yeah, he's kind of like a big name now. But he's very intense. At least, you know, that was
American Baptist Evangelical. We've heard about the ABA.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Who was it that talked about the ABA?
Paul Schaefer.
It was Paul Schaefer. Okay.
I'll have to get background on that.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's cool. He he was very instrumental in my early faith, and my faith, I think, was flimsy because I was always very academic growing up. So I really dove into scripture and kind of learning all about Jesus, but I was very undisciplined when it came to prayer, which I think was probably my biggest downfall, because I couldn't fathom what a personal relationship was with God. It almost seemed hokey, corny, kind of unbelievable to me. And so since I didn't even really approach that, then I think later on, as other influences came into my life, it became pretty easy to fall out of faith, which, you know, once I got older into high school and girls started being a problem, and, you know, you deal with all the things in high school, my faith started falling apart. A big part of it was I came back from church camp, and I was like, we need to follow these ideals. We need to be all about that. And then they were kind of, all my friends and stuff kind of had that, you know, high that they rode from camp, that it was almost like the feeling that they got from camp was their God. It wasn't God itself. And so I all my friend group, they started to distance themselves from me because they were worried, like either I was judging them, or like once they started partying, they couldn't do that around me. So that started to become very problematic to me because I was just feeling alone. And so one summer, this is the summer before senior year, on July 4th, I hadn't been drinking at all, and decided, I was like, I got to salvage my friendship. So I go to this party and I drink 6 double shots of tequila chased with beer in like 30 minutes. I pass out on the lawn. But
you were good, right? Because liquor before beer, never fear.
Well, so I pass out on the lawn, and suddenly I'm like not breathing. And so my friends carry me into the house. I start throwing up blood all over the walls.
Whoa.
And they don't know what to do with me. I'm 17 years old. And so they take me to my parents' house. and they take me to the hospital. I think my heart stopped for 10 minutes. I think I was like basically legally dead. My blood alcohol level was 0.324. So a third of my body was alcohol. Yeah. Like my blood system.
How much did you weigh, you think?
215 probably.
Oh, you're a big guy.
Yeah, I was a football player and I was pretty stout, but yeah, I think that night I learned a big truth about me for a while, that I've had a death wish for myself for a long time. Yeah. And it was like a big cry for help. And so after that, like I wasn't somebody who really partied before that at all. Mm-hmm. After that, didn't really either. I was kind of like, my family was scared to death for me, but it kind of didn't even register that had happened. Mm-hmm. My brother was super sad. My parents didn't know what to do. And I kind of like...
It was like a traumatic thing, huh?
Yes,
you think you have PTSD just from that experience, maybe?
It's hard to say. Yeah, kind of. I don't know. But as, as we'll talk about, there's always been these things in my life that I've just kind of glided by and walked past, and eventually it caught up to me. And so... I went to college at UT. I graduated number 1 at the Woodlands, which I think was a pretty awesome accomplishment. Out of like 1,200 people. And so when I went to UT, I was all about, I'm going to be as successful as I possibly can, but I'm also going to do whatever I want all the time. Like, it almost became this persona that I craved, like burning the candle on both ends. And I've always been very much a person of extremes, of all or nothing, which later plays into the mental illness.
Well, I said like Johnny Football, like partied hard the whole time he was at A&M.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know, like now I look back at it and it seems just so juvenile, stupid, selfish, all this stuff. But like at that point, it's like I didn't care. I kind of just like, I didn't have a sense of purpose. I had lost it along the way that I had. A really bad breakup had a lot to do with that. And then so once I was in Austin at UT, I didn't ever become an atheist, but it just didn't become a priority at all. Secular humanism, like hedonism, all those kind of things were paramount. And so I actually had a second alcohol poisoning sophomore year at UT. And it made me think of John Belushi, which a lot of people compared me to for a long time.
I feel that. I see that a little, even just like looks a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
I mean, you look better than John Belushi. But.
Thanks. Should have seen me a year ago. But yeah, that night I drank absinthe, I think, and a bunch of others, just drank a ton. And then I took a Vicodin at this house party, walked down the street, tried to walk like 5 miles home, ended up on some random stranger's front porch in like their porch swing, and which is like a John Belushi kind of story.
It's probably okay in Austin though, right? They were like, "Hey, we have a friend.
Right, yeah. He's just living outside. He's not homeless."
Yeah, take him some coffee.
Right. And so I woke up in the hospital and I'd like peed myself, and I had this like mullet wig on, and I was like yelling at everybody. Everybody in the hospital, like, "You have no right to keep me here," all this stuff. And it was just insane. Like, because I drank myself into oblivion, and that just ended up being kind of the way I operated. And then, later in college, the heavier stuff started to get introduced, mostly like psychedelics. The weed was definitely like a constantly present thing. And then cocaine towards the end of it, which cocaine ended up being the one thing that I think was the worst thing that was involved in my life for a long time, for so many different reasons.
And what were you doing at UT Austin though, studying?
So I studied management information systems. I was in the business school, and then I got a second degree in government. And
that checks out.
I originally went there to study medicine, so I did 60 hours of pre-med before I decided to drop out of it.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
I mean,
60 hours?
60 hours.
You were like a year away from pre-med.
Yeah. A big part of it was...
Was it 72 hours or 80 hours? I mean, how many do you have to have?
90 or something.
90 for a 4-year degree?
I think so. I can't really remember.
That seems wild.
Yeah, I went to school as a junior, and I still graduated in 4 years with 2 degrees.
Got it.
Because I hopped around and stuff. But I was pretty, like, intensive academically, but I barely graduated because I just stopped caring at the end of it. Like, really lost my purpose. I still hate business, and I hated the business school, and it was kind of something that my parents wanted me to just finish. And I was like, I didn't want to do anything. I was like, I hate the corporate world. I don't have any direction now. And so I ended up working for IBM right out of school. I was what was called a business transformation consultant. And I was living in Dallas at the time. And I started to spiral, drinking and doing drugs again because I just didn't enjoy what I was doing.
Did they drug test you at IBM?
No, not at all. But it was fun. Like what I ended up doing is I had a company credit card.
Oh,
and
boy.
I ended up running up $12,000 of debt on it of just personal expenses. So I got fired. From there after 6 months once they found this out, and I had to pay all that back. So for a brief time, I did move to Tyler and lived at my parents' house after that because
you had to do something to cover that debt.
Fell flat on my face. And so what I did was I didn't do anything for 6 months. Like I was super depressed. I just didn't do anything. I finally started working out and trying to get my life back together. And then I found a job back in Dallas. So I moved back, and it was for this company called KPMG. They're one of the big 4 accounting firms. There's like Deloitte, Ernst & Young, and whatever. And so I worked with them for like 2 years. My client was AT&T at their headquarters there. And I was actually like able to keep my nose clean for a while. But then I had an opportunity to go back to Austin, which is what I was really wanting to do. I wasn't a fan of Dallas. I didn't like the concrete jungle. I didn't like the $30,000 a year millionaires or whatever, that whole, it's very plasticky there to me. And so I couldn't fit in there. But a big theme of my life is I've never been able to really fit in anywhere. And so I went down to Austin, and I'm linked up with a guy that was working in the film industry. And I knew him from my time at UT because 2 of my roommates at a time, they were RTF majors. For those who don't know, that's radio, television, film. And I ended up being their subject or their lead actor throughout their projects.
Okay.
And I'll have to show y'all sometime, but one of their theses was me as a Bible salesman. And I get tempted by this one lady who I'm selling a Bible to, and then it ends with her, Mary Magdalene, me as Jesus in a robe, and it's pretty like sacrilegious. But
wow,
it ended up being the example for the UT thesis program for 5 years after we graduated. So it was kind of a big deal. So this guy that I met on that, he was working on Robert Rodriguez's show From Dusk Till Dawn, which was the TV adaptation of the movie he made in the 90s. And so he got me into that industry, which I worked for the next 10 years in, which was great for me because I wanted to be in some creative industry. I've always been a drawer, painter, done music, all that kind of stuff. And so it was a huge deal to like get kind of my foot in the door there. But what I really found over time is it was more of an excuse for me to put off dealing with myself in a lot of regards. All the trouble I had gotten in with work before, and even though I had a good 2-year period of being relatively clean, it's like now I jump back into this environment that encouraged partying. Yeah. Like that kind of lifestyle is definitely not frowned upon. There's definitely different people in various stages of recovery. But, you know, like, I've worked on shows where the props department has cocaine budgeted into their budget. You know, it's like, wow. It's not something that's hidden at all. And so during that time, I got to work on some really cool stuff for the next 10 years. I worked as what's called a location manager. We dealt with like scouting locations. We dealt with permits, managing actual locations when we shoot at them and stuff. And so it was interesting for a large part. I've worked for AMC, Netflix, like I said, Robert Rodriguez. And then the last show that I worked on before my whole world came crashing down was Fear the Walking Dead.
No joke.
Really?
Yeah, that was the last one.
In Georgia or wherever?
No, it was in Austin.
They shot it in Austin?
They shot it in Georgia originally, and then 3 or 4 seasons were in Austin. I worked on 3 of them.
Wow.
And so right when the pandemic happened, we were in the middle of one of our seasons, and it just, the whole, you know, rug got pulled out from under us. And so that summer was wild for me because we got paid like our union stipend and stuff, and I had nothing but free time. So my habits got increasingly terrible. Mm-hmm. I've loved what y'all talked about when it comes to, you know, tinfoil hat stuff and conspiracy stuff. So the COVID thing like shattered my brain. Because I was like, oh man, this is it. Like, it was complete lunacy to me. Mm-hmm. So I was like, man, really nothing matters now. I was drinking about a half a handle of whiskey every day, mixing, you know, cocaine and horse tranquilizers and just
ketamine.
Yep. Yeah. And it was just, I kind of thought the world was going to end, or that, like, you know, who knows what's going to happen. So by the time the show came back, and this was like in September of 2020, it was an interesting time. I basically demanded that I get promoted before I get back on that show, because it was time for me to. But I was in no mental, physical condition to get back into it. Mm-hmm. So I get hired back in. This is in September. Got promoted. Pretty stoked. I made a conscious decision to not drink because I was like, I can't do this with all these new responsibilities. But I still kept doing cocaine sparingly. Mostly because, I don't know if y'all are aware, the hours that you have to work on film sets are incredible. Like 16 to 18 hour days, sometimes 6-7 days a week, for up to like 9 months a year. And so it's just go, go, go. It's like a military schedule kind of thing. And the old adage, the show must go on, is real. It's like, you've got to do whatever it takes to make sure that what you need to get done gets done, or you'll get axed, you know? And so sometimes the demands are crazy. Once COVID happened, my job responsibilities tripled overnight. Because if you can imagine, like, yeah. I won't get too much into it, but like the trailers and stuff that you have at what's called your base camp, you have tents for catering and all this stuff. Now that we had 6-foot spacing rules, all these,
got it.
And you only have a certain limited 3-dimensional space to operate with, and there's all these rules that go into play. So I was freaking out, man. Like, I just wasn't ready. And then beginning of November, I could feel myself really spiraling. I was emotionally distraught all the time. I was distracted. I was doing all these like stupid things, and I wasn't sleeping. And so one day I basically was going on 24 to 36 hours straight. And at the end of the day, the Attorney General's office calls me, and there's an issue with our permit. The producer of the show won't answer the calls. The department head of the show won't answer the calls, and so they're going to me. Our department was like 25 people big. And I was the new man in that position. And so I started like really freaking out. And they were going to shut the show down. And I didn't know what to do. And I barely even remember what happens at this point. But all I remember is I had been not drinking for about 3 weeks. And I go and I open up my refrigerator door and I see a bottle of champagne. And my mom still has this video from like an Instagram story. I recorded it and I said like, well, here's it or something. I just poured champagne in a cup. I would say about 12 hours later, I wake up screaming in the hospital. Don't know what's going on. They go, you've been in a very, very serious car accident. And I'm like, don't know what's going on. I conk back out. I wake up again. And the nurse is like, your blood alcohol is very, very high. Like, this is not good. This is not a good situation. Eventually, come to find out that I had just bought a 2021 Toyota Tundra 3 weeks prior to this, and I totaled it. I didn't know how. I knew another car was involved. I knew that I had broken my femur in 2 places, that I narrowly missed my femoral artery by about 1 inch. And I dislocated my femur once from my hip when the accident happened, and then the second time when they put me on the gurney back in. I was like, oh my gosh, this is terrifying. I spend 5 days in the hospital. I don't really have any desire to leave the hospital because I don't know what awaits me. My thought is there's going to be a cop right outside. I'm going to jail just because they knew I was drinking. My blood alcohol was like, I think 0.19. You know, I'm just waiting it out there. And my mom, she said something to me that made kind of change the course of how I felt about all these things. And I think it's because I twisted it into my own way. And it was something along the lines about just see what happens. You know, like don't do anything but see what happens. I think my roommate came and I think he said that there was something on the news about it. 5 days later, they kind of kicked me out, like made me walk and were like, you gotta go, dude. It took a while for me to just even get straight, I realized, because I was just so loopy. They had me on medication. I had all the stuff in my system. I go home, nothing. You know, there's nothing happens. This is November 7th, 2020 when the accident happens. You know, my parents are pissed at me because they know I was drinking. They decide to come pick me up for Christmas for like a month. And I remember one night my mom broached the subject about like talking about it. And I remember that I said, I don't want to talk about it. And that was it. That's all we talked about that incident. I get back to Austin in January. There is a letter from a lawyer saying that a passenger in the other vehicle had been deceased. And I just completely lost all feeling and didn't know what to do. And I was in shock. What I ended up doing the next several years is I basically became a shell of a person. I took the coward's way and didn't want to deal with it. I was half expecting all the time for cops to come and arrest me. Never happened.
Like looking over your shoulder?
Always, yeah. And so it even got to the point, it took me about 8 months to heal. During that time, I remember looking on Facebook, and her son was looking for me by name online. And that kind of freaked me out. I looked at like some of his information and definitely didn't seem like a dude that I wanted to mess with at all. So I kind of put that in the back of my mind. I stayed completely sober for a while. Like I had noticed, I was so sick of myself. I didn't want to get back into that lifestyle at all. The crazy thing about what I think our minds can do sometimes, or what my mind did, 6 months passed and I was like, man, I should probably like get back into my lifestyle that I was before, or people are going to think that something's weird. So that's the weird trick my brain played on me. It was like, go start getting messed up again, even though you hate that now. You don't want to do that, but you're trying so hard to disguise yourself. You know what I mean? Eventually, I went back to work in the film industry, which at this point, I was like, I'm dealing with permits. I hire police in Austin. in my mind, I'm like, if I'm going to get arrested, it's now.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm not turning myself in, but I'm certainly not hiding.
I mean, it doesn't sound like you really ran or hid anyway. Like you were at the hospital for 5 days.
Yeah.
Nobody came. It took you 8 months. I mean, you weren't just hopping around places. Like for 8 months, you were pretty stationary.
It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I mean, I was getting letters to my house from attorneys. I stayed at the same house from when that accident happened until I moved out of Austin.
Wow.
So 3 years. Nothing ever happened. It just started messing with me mentally. You know what I mean? Because I was like, what's going on? I knew that eventually I was going to come to the end of my rope, because what ended up starting to happen is my passport expired. Then my license expired. So once my license expired, my career in the film industry and that whole charade of me still working when I had no right to, that had to come to an end, because we had to rent trucks to drive and stuff. And
so you couldn't go renew a license?
I couldn't work in that industry without a license.
But you couldn't renew your license?
Well, having a warrant out?
You thought there was a warrant.
Yeah.
Was there a warrant?
I did. I looked it up, and I did have a warrant out.
Okay. That clears it up, because I'm like, well,
I accidentally left that part out. Yes, I absolutely had a warrant out. It was...
But they just didn't come knock on the door.
Nope. And I was around police for 2 years, you know. Like, this isn't me like trying to be braggadocious or anything, but I'm not an unknown person there.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not like this big time person, but I mean, I did a campaign where my face was on like city buses and stuff, and I work with police, and you know, I wasn't hiding, and I wasn't somebody unknown. So once my career in that world came to a close, that's when things started to get really hairy. I was able to play it off like I was sick of the industry. Like, my roommates didn't know about this. My family didn't know about this.
No way.
Not one single person. I kept this secret this whole time. And it was crazy to me because the world moved on. Nobody really asked me about it. Mm-hmm. The people I worked with, they raised $6,000 in the GoFundMe in my name. That I took. The reason why I took it, and this is such a moral quandary, and I'm so sick to my stomach about it, is it was going to expire at a certain time, the GoFundMe, and then the money would be returned to them. And I was like, well, do I take this? It goes back to them, and then they're like, why did he do that?
Right, yeah.
Or do I take it?
Well, it's not like you started the GoFundMe. Somebody else did it.
It was my boss.
Got it.
There's so many things about the situation that boggle my mind, because I find it very hard to believe that nobody looked into it. Strange to me.
Everybody's so absorbed with themselves.
That's what I started to realize after a while. I was surprised, because like the production company people knew that like I was getting mentally unfurled towards the end. Like, I had a conversation with my boss about it. And so it was just knowing what I knew about the situation and stuff, and then the production company donated. I thought the whole thing was strange. And it was also interesting because I was like raising my complaints about the hours they were having us work and all this different stuff. I almost felt like the production money put into that to shut me up about that stuff. I mean, you can't speculate on it. What ended up happening is I started working like these odd jobs that you can do with apps in your phone. I was working at Goodwill and stuff, and just running out of options. I decided to quit drinking again. I was still taking THC gummies and started microdosing psilocybin pills. One day I just snapped. This was in August. Like, there were all these things that were starting to like, I think it was very much the psilocybin, but it's like, the term I like to use is like splinters will rise. You know, if you have something deep, eventually it's going to come to the surface.
And usually it's festered at that point, too.
Mm-hmm. Right. And
this is in 2021?
This is now in 2023.
23, okay. Big fast forward.
Yeah.
Got it.
I remember one day I called my dad. I had just quit this job, like this gig job I was working at, because this guy was acting in a way that probably wasn't anywhere in touch with reality, but I was falling apart. So I was like, Dad, I got to come clean. And I told him about the accident and that a woman had passed away. Let me rephrase that. I killed a woman in a car accident because of my terrible decisions. I tend to say a woman passed away in the car accident And I feel like that's a way to soften my responsibility. I killed somebody in a car accident, and that's what happened. My whole feeling about this when I told him is and this was my fear the whole time. I was like, they're going to completely cut me off. I'm never going to talk to my family again. And God blessed me with an incredible family and a great upbringing. My dad and I have been at odds for a long time, but the way that he responded to that whole situation still blows my mind, and was completely instrumental, monumental to me getting back in my faith, because he was like, you know, I guess we're in this together now. We're going to work through this. And I was just amazed because I was so disgusted with myself. My habits all over the years that were completely self-destructive and I was killing myself slowly. I was fine with that because it was only feeling like it was just me.
Yeah.
And no matter how far away I went from, how far away I wandered from my faith, I've always like tried to be a good moral person and tried to treat people well. And so when that house of cards came falling down and shattered my whole reality, and my mistakes took somebody's life, like I was completely hopeless. And so I didn't want to live anymore. I was too chicken shit to kill myself. But here now I was given this little gift of grace. And I didn't really understand grace at all before. I understood it now because now I wasn't going to have to disappear off the face of the earth. Now I was maybe not going to go to jail for the rest of my life. Now I had somebody, my dad, my mom, that were going to walk through this with me. Basically, after that, what we decided to do, because I didn't have any money anymore, I had gone through like a ton of money that I saved up for 2 years, like went through that over a 2-year period because of me not really being able to work anymore. And so I had to surrender myself to them, and we got a lawyer. The lawyer was like, well, here's the deal. The statute of limitations for intoxicated manslaughter expires in 3 years. At this point, I think I was at 2 years, 9 months. So he was like, if you can just stay cool for 3 months, that'll pass. And then we'll deal with the warrant. He didn't even want me to turn myself in at that point.
Yeah.
I was still mentally falling apart, still taking drugs. And so what happened was my roommate started moving out because I was just becoming completely unhinged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, imagine you were miserable, but it was probably miserable to live with you too.
Yeah. Oh, I got up to like 300 something pounds. Like I was just a mess, man. I was dead. I was all but dead, basically. Especially like, I mean, I was different to deal with when I was hiding it because I was just a cynical asshole. But then when the truth came out, then I just became a cartoon character. Just because, like, I think that was my natural response to, like, anticipating the trauma that was going to come. It was like, now everything that I had hidden for 3 years was coming out, you know. My roommates move out. I'm starting to get paranoid that neighbors across the street are doing something, like that they're looking out for me. I see they have, like, Christmas lights in their window, so I'm thinking they're, like, lasers pointing in, like, on a scope in my house and stuff. Like, really things are starting to get hairy. I'm starting to really hallucinate like scenarios and people looking like other people and like putting all these things together that weren't really there. So at this point I'm working at this music venue. At the end of that night, I'm walking down the street in Austin and I go sit on this corner where this electrical box is. I look, and this is, bear with me because this is what's going on in my mind. I don't know if this is reality. So I'm sitting there with my backpack. I turn around and I feel like there's these two guys that are approaching me. To me, that night, they look like two Hispanic individuals with like nondescript clothes and backpacks. They look like they could be like cartel people. And so I was like, this is really bizarre. So I get up and I yell at them. I'm like, who the fuck are you? Get away from me. I'm like yelling in public. And so I walk I see them walk diagonally away from me behind these dumpsters. And I'm like, they're watching me this whole time. And so I do a roundabout around one of the venues in Austin. I come back around this alleyway into this heavily populated venue with people out in their parking lot. I walk through there. Those two guys come back up to me, and they meet me in the middle of this crowd. And I yell at them again. I say, get the fuck away from me. Like, just leave me alone. And all the crowd is like, what's going on? I'm like, who are these guys? Thinking that it might be attached to the lady in the accident. Like, I just didn't know at this point. And so once I freak out, they go and they scurry off around the corner. And I'm like, what is going on? Because there's incidents that keep happening more and more like this towards the end of all of this. And so this is like 2, 3 in the morning. I'm like, what the hell? So I go further into the parking lot. I go sit down on a curb. I see a state trooper pull up and just sit there. I see a cop, Austin APD, come up and back into the parking spot. And I'm just sitting there like, what's going on? Because, I mean, there was just an incident, like yelling and stuff. And so I see this homeless guy walk up. And granted, the headspace I'm in, it looks like to me he is either talking to himself or he's communicating with something in like his ear or something. Mm-hmm. And then he walks up to me and he goes, hey man, do you got anything? And I was like, what? And he's like, do you got anything to like sell? And I was like, no, absolutely not. And then I remember him like going back and talking to the cop. That might have not happened, but I was like, what is going on? So I get up and I walk towards the corner. Right when I do that, an ambulance pulls up and 2 paramedics come out. And I'm like, this is just insane. And they don't do anything. They're just standing there like looking around like they were anticipating something. Yeah. And so I'm like, I'm just staying close to them.
I'm paranoid for you right now, dude.
It was so terrifying. And so I just stayed with them because I was like, as long as I'm right here, like nothing will happen. Eventually a cop walks up and I go, sir, can I just kind of tell you what happened? And so he's like, yes, that's fine. And so I explained these dudes that like came up to me and stuff. And I told him everything that I told y'all. And he goes like, do you know like what they look like and stuff? And I explained it. Not great. I mean, it was just two dudes in skinny backpacks with like blank colored clothes on. So he didn't really have anything to go on. I was like, I don't even know if you can do anything about this. I just had a really weird experience and I needed to let you know. And so then he goes, can I get your name? And I was like, oh no. And so I go, if it is all right with you, I'd rather not say. And he goes, okay, that's fine. And I was like, oh.
Never happens to anybody.
And so I was like, oh, good Lord. I walk a couple blocks away from that parking lot. I try to just stay in a well-lit area. I'm still just kind of in shock right now. I'm thinking every car's like looking at me, trying to get me or something. And so I'm in this real just panic state. I look over that homeless dude that was in the parking lot earlier. He walks up to me out of nowhere and he just comes up and gives me a hug and he says, Jesus loves you. And I immediately started sobbing. But at the same time, I just had this it was kind of like a weight lifted off my shoulders, and I just felt an overwhelming sense of comfort. That sense of comfort didn't last very long, but what I felt like, now that I look back on it, that interaction right there was like this little pebble that kind of started rolling into a bigger boulder over time, because for whatever reason, like Jesus was definitely a part of it and grew into be a bigger part of it. But it was just this kind of like little glimmer of a thought that everything's going to be fine.
So how did he just walked up and hugged you? Like
Yeah.
you were super paranoid, but like somehow...
And I was 2-3 blocks away. Like it was right off of I-35, so it wasn't like a back side street or anything. But this guy came up and found me and came up and hugged me, and it was it was a moment that I felt was like a very supernatural occurrence.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, I just kind of hung out there for a while, and then just decided it was time to go home.
Go play with that pebble.
Yeah. And that night, I don't sleep. I'm going through this heavy conflict of I almost got kidnapped to get beheaded in Mexico. That's what I was feeling like. Mm-hmm. Probably not the case.
Yeah, they might have been Mormons or something.
Yeah.
It was wild. It was very wild given my headspace. And so what I decided to do, so I had a beard, kind of wild hair. I decided I didn't know what I was going to do next. I was thinking I was going to disappear. So what I did was I shaved my head, I shaved my eyebrows, and I shaved my beard.
What?
Yeah.
And you were on drugs then, or no?
Yeah, mildly. But I mean,
mildly?
Enough.
Totally, like...
You had a Britney Spears experience, bro. You shaved your whole head.
More so just a complete psychotic episode.
Okay.
And
you think clinically that's what that was?
It ended up being pretty much diagnosed as such.
Sweet.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad.
Papers on it.
So what I ended up doing is I started grabbing all my stuff in my house and just moving it to the curb. Like I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to get rid of all of my stuff. And so people started pulling up to my house. I was getting rid of my TV. I was getting rid of iPad, like everything. I was just, because I didn't know if I was going to live or die. I was so confused at this point. And then so eventually what I did, I was inside the house and I thought I heard somebody walking up in the attic. And so I was like, oh no.
The shadow people are here.
Right. Yeah, the shadow people are taking over. And so I go outside and I lock all the doors and I call the cops. And I'm like,
you locked them from the outside.
Yeah, because I was like, if they try to leave, I'm gonna see them.
Yeah. Oh my god.
But also, I'm probably locked out. No, I had a key. But then everything started playing over my head, and I was like, dude, like the cops didn't come for 45 minutes, and I was like, dude, this has got to end. This whole everything, like this isn't gonna end well. I don't know where this is going, but I'm not being safe. Like, a little voice in my head, I think it was God, was just being like, do something about this because this is not going to end well. So I call him back and I go and meet him at a corner store down the street. Granted, like remember about my eyebrows and hair not being there. And I'm wearing like a button down shirt with a bunch of bananas on it. And like look like a fool. In my mind, it was like I want to be completely recognizable in broad daylight.
You set up
dude. You just dressed up like a Quentin Tarantino movie.
Set up a Tinder date with the APD. You're like, y'all don't worry about it. Y'all didn't come to me. I'll meet you at a corner store.
And I even told him, I was like, I got a bright blue hat on. I got a banana shirt. Like, you'll be able to see me. And they're probably like, what are we getting into? So I get there and I explain what's going on. They're like, can we get you water? And I'm like, yes. And then, we're talking a little bit more. We go outside and I go, it's probably about the right time to tell you that I got a warrant out for a DWI. And so they were like, well, you've been cool with us. Let's just look it up, but we're going to have to handcuff you and take you in. I was like, okay. So they were nice enough that I could call my roommate who just moved out because my dog was out in the yard to go get him. But I had just taken some psilocybin capsules right when I go to jail.
Oh, no, dude. How many?
I don't know.
Not many.
My joke was always with mushrooms that I always would try to microdose, and then they'd eventually become a macrodose. So it was like
a heroic dose.
Right, exactly. I remember that from the Casey episode. I was like, I've been there for sure. 5 grams in silent darkness. So, I'm going to jail, and I hadn't told the lawyer. I hadn't told my parents or family. I hadn't told anybody. I just did this. And so I have no plan. I go into jail. Immediately things start getting real weird. I start just trying to
tripping.
I'm tripping, and so I'm trying to escape. Like in my mind, I'm like going through all these movies I've ever seen, like trying to dig through corners. I swear to God. So I end up being there for 7 days. during this time, I conjure up in my head, because of my shaved head and stuff, that I'm auditioning for what's going to be called Bane Begins, and it's like it's a Bane backstory. So I start like, I swear. And so I'm doing, dude, oh man, just to think about everything I did, I kept intentionally flooding my cell with like, like I got butt naked every time, and we put my clothes in the toilet, and I was intentionally flooding it. I ran from guards. It was insane. I went to a padded cell for several days and thought that was a bouncy house castle. I started seeing like the Joker and one of the inmates across the hall. Like I was for these 7 days, I don't know if I slept or ate. I started seeing names and social security numbers written all over the prison walls. Like,
sounds like you ate all the mushrooms,
right,
bro.
Yeah. Yeah, it was bad, and the no sleep and all that was terrible.
It's a superhero dose.
So by the end of that, I was done. Once my parents came down and they tried to talk to me, and I was like, I wouldn't talk to my dad. I wouldn't talk to anybody, because in my mind at that time, I was like, I've done this to myself. I don't want any help.
Yep.
I'm going to stay here as long as I need to.
Yeah.
I wasn't helping my case at all, because of all the foolish things I was doing, the way I was acting. Like, I was hearing so much crazy stuff. I remember one night, like, I felt like the Grim Reaper was over my shoulder. So by the end of it, this guy came from this treatment center in Canyon Lake called Windmill Wellness Ranch. Mm-hmm. Basically, it was like, you leave and you come with me, or you don't leave. And at that point, my spirit was broken. I remember when the cops brought me out, I just collapsed to the ground and started crying, because I was like, I was living in this complete fantasy inside of a jail cell for a long time, but I didn't really know what was going to happen next, or didn't even really like think about it. So once I was like out, I was like, oh my gosh, like what just happened? Like, even to this day, thinking about everything that happened in there and going through it in my brain terrifies me because of what state I was in. I went to this treatment center. I was not fit to be at a treatment center yet, because I was still pretty not mentally sound to be there.
Right.
And so what happened...
Did they give you a psych evaluation or anything?
They did, but I played it cool.
You did good.
Yeah, because I've always been the kind of person that can talk myself out of this kind of stuff. And so like I was like, this will be very easy to hold it together.
Yeah. It was my first custody battle. Like, we had to do an MMPI too, and like I went to school to be a counselor, to be a licensed chemical dependency counselor. It's what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And I did work in that field and do that job function as a counselor intern for a while. And after that, while I was working in that function, I got in this custody battle for Lexi and had to take an MMPI too, which is the most common, or at least at the time, the most common psych eval. Bro, they got questions on there like, have you ever wanted to be the opposite sex? I'm like, yeah. And then I'm like, wait, is that answer crazy?
Yeah,
and then they'll ask you the same question backwards, and you're like, how did I answer that? I mean, it's an impossibility, dude. You can't take one of those tests and not have an answer that's not good.
Yeah. Right. Well, I feel like, too, once you're somebody who's admitted there, I knew I needed help for a long time. And I kind of concealed it very well, mostly because, like, on all outward appearances, I was just somebody who liked to have a good time. And kind of, like, to a completely exaggerated extent. Like, people were often like, dude, you're crazy. But I was able to keep it together.
Well, like, do you think that the drugs and alcohol were, like, your solution to the problem between your ears?
Yes, because I've always been pretty adamantly opposed to most pharmaceuticals, and so
yeah. But if somebody says this is mushroom pills, you're like, give
exactly.
me 5 of them.
So I felt in my mind it was a good, feasible solution, because I was like, well, this works better and I'm having a good time. But inside I knew I was like destroying myself. And then it just became too much of a habit that had been going on forever, that it's like the wheels were going too fast, that I couldn't stop. So once I got there, eventually I had this freak out after being there for a day, where I started, like, I was in detox for everybody that initially gets admitted is in detox.
Yeah.
And you're kind of isolated. But I was like, still like in a clown world. And so I was like off going and doing stuff on my own. I thought I was like inspecting this place. And these people like didn't know how to handle me because I wasn't like a drunk. I was just an insane person, you know? And I wasn't harming anybody, but it was like, how is this guy gonna like calm down? Because at this point I think they tested my urine or something. My THC levels was still like off the charts, which was in my mind crazy, but I was taking 200 milligrams a day of gummies probably by the end of it. So eventually they are having this like meeting down at the gym, and I'm like, what's going on? Like, why is everybody meeting and I'm here by myself? So I go down to the gym, I busted in the door, and I just start like walking all around in through the group. I start just like acting like I'm working out. They're like talking to me like, Troy, what's going on? And then I remember like looking at the counselor and I'm like, I know I have like probably dead eyes right now. And I go outside of the gym and I just start yelling about how like, this place is owned by China. you all are like, I was like, everybody here is being mind controlled. This is MK Ultra. I was like, the Chinese has hijacked the air with nanotechnology. I ripped my shirt off. I was going crazy. And people were like, that worked at this place were coming down the hills.
They hit you with that Benadryl and that, what is that, Thorazine after that?
Shot in the butt for this one.
That eventually came. And so I see like 15 people that work there coming down the hills. And I'm like yelling at them to get away from me. I'm like throwing rocks at them. That I don't even remember. My mom told me this later. But there's a big tire that they do for like tire flipping. And in my mind, I was like, this whole grid is controlled by lasers. And if I get up on this tire, they can't hurt me. And so I'm like huddled there telling them to all get away from me. Then all of a sudden, the caravan of sheriff SUVs come in. There's 3 of them. And I'm like, thank God they're going to get me out of this place. I'm like, this is awesome. And so then I start thinking I'm in the Bane Begins movie again. And they put handcuffs on me and a spit mask. And I'm like, this is a crazy...
Definitely
like,
Bane.
Yeah.
Bane vibes, 100%.
So then I get in the car and I'm like, I'm super excited. I'm like, I'm finally free. I can get it. Like, where are they taking me? This is great. And then they take me into this building where there's this other girl, and then she's insane. I'm not insane.
Yeah,
like, this
I'm
girl's insane. So there's an officer in there with me, and then there's me and her, and there's like a hallway, and there's no way to get out of the door. So I'm like thinking I'm helping the officer like get this girl in check. All of a sudden I realize like I'm in the nut house. Like I'm in a very acute treatment facility. Come to find out, I had to be there for 10 days because I still needed to come to normal. And being in that experience totally scared the hell out of me because I was with real insane people. Yeah. And once I realized that I was among them, I was like, oh my gosh, like how, like where did I get to? Like where's this? Because I've had like manic episodes before, but this last like psychotic episode that lasted like 3 weeks, 4 weeks was ridiculous.
They talk about jails, institutions, and death. You
Absolutely.
know, like that's the end result.
And so after that experience, I was so happy to go back there, and I did everything I could. And so
were they like, oh no?
Yeah, everyone was terrified.
And you were like, no, it's cool. I'm cool now, you know?
I had to prove myself as like a different person. But over the course of my 90 days there, the people that were with me at the beginning, they were like, this is the most amazing like transformation I've ever seen. And this is the gist of it, which leads me back into my faith. So once I got back there, I was like, man, I got to do something. Because for some reason, I'm not in jail. Some reason I'm not in a straitjacket in a padded room. Like I have a chance here. And so I went into they had like these bookshelves, and I saw a 1-year Bible, and I was like, you know what? Like, I've never read this front to back. I've read stuff, I've been familiar, I've done Bible studies, I've immersed myself at some point. Where it tripped me up at the point where I was really questioning and falling out of faith is I was like, the mindset that I had was, if I find one little thing that I don't agree with, it's all false. So this time I was like, approach it like you did all those other philosophical books that you read, where you take what makes sense. Oh, I agree with this. This sounds good to me. Just have an open mind.
Chew on it.
Right. And if there's something good, plant it in your brain. Something doesn't make sense, keep going.
Yeah.
And so I had an open mind. And a big part of that was my counselor was like, you have such a rigid way of thinking. Just be open-minded. And it blew my mind because I was like, I've always thought I've been very open-minded.
Yeah.
But it's always been, I'm open-minded to anything that's usually like counterculture or against mainstream. I'm not open-minded to things that actually work for people. And I thought about where I was, when I was in treatment, I was like, where were you when you were in the best place in your life? And I was like, it's back when I gave my life to Christ. That's when things made sense. That's when that's when everything was clicking for me. And so I was like, man, I need to get open-minded. And so AA was a big part of that in treatment. Just seeing God in the 12 steps was very disarming to me because it wasn't like preachy, beat it over your head. So that definitely kept me open to it. And I just, I started reading the Bible from like a historical perspective. Like,
did you start in Genesis, or did you? That like Bible in a year?
Bible in a year, yeah. What it does is it has an Old Testament, New Testament, Proverb, and Psalms each day. So it goes chronologically through the Old Testament, chronologically through the New, and then Proverbs and Psalms. It kind of recycles them after a little bit to where it lines up. I did that I think it ended up being 15 months. So this was December of last year when I got out of treatment. And I started in September. So I finished the Bible in a year, like last month. And over that time, I was still, there were a lot of things involving Jesus and God that I was like, I don't really like grasp these things yet. I was thinking tonight, and I think the big thing that started tripping me up over the course of my life was I remember I watched this documentary called Esoteric Agenda in like 2011. And it talked about some of the, Jesus's ties with other pagan religions and stuff, dealing with December 25th, his birthday, and all these different things. And so I remember that really kind of took a hold of me. And then I was like, when I was thinking the whole world was an illusion, then so was Jesus. And so what I decided to now is like, all these little details might not matter. Let me just look at the words that he said. And go from there. I don't even have to really believe in the resurrection at this point. Let me just look at the words he said. And
the moral teachings, the good stuff.
And that's a good start, because even if he didn't exist as a person, from a moral standpoint, I can stand by everything he says. Right. So being open to that really helped me. Then I got diagnosed with bipolar 1, which I kind of always knew that I had.
When was that?
It was in treatment. Okay. And so I got on a medicine plan that I feel like works, because I would say about 2011 I started going to a therapist for the first time. And the thing that really threw me away from professional mental health and pharmaceuticals was, I went and talked to this therapist. Within 45 minutes I was prescribed, what's that sleep?
Ambien,
and then Zoloft and something else. And so it was like
probably Xanax.
Yeah, I think it was. And it was like this cocktail that I just got thrown on. And then I was like, this like flat non-existence. I prefer the roller coasters. So I never wanted to deal with it after that. Thankfully, in treatment, they got me prescribed to a medication plan that works, that I'm still on. Been staying sober. I feel, because people will ask me, like, what do you think has worked for you? And the way I say is that it's hard to quantify, because there's a lot of things that are in play right now that I think makes my sobriety and my life steady right now. And I think the medication works. I think everything that I learned in treatment works. The time that I had in AA works. I'm not active in AA anymore, and that's nothing against AA, but I started wanting to get more involved with the church and my faith in Christ. There might be a time when I go back to AA as a sponsor. But then also in treatment, this is an aside, they had this therapy called brain frequency, which when I was first there, I was like, this is definitely some, MK Ultra shit.
Yep. It's all starting to line up now.
Right. But it's something worth looking into. You do this therapy thing that helps with your neurons regrow after they're damaged from alcohol and drug abuse. But
that sounds expensive.
Yeah, it was a pricey treatment for sure. But going back to answer the question, like, I think for me it's a spiritual transformation. Mm-hmm. I think sobriety is first and foremost, but the way I look at, and obviously I'm not a mental health expert and I can only speak for myself, I think that my mental health was completely exacerbated by the inputs into my body. Mm-hmm. My sleep habits, like everything I was putting in my body was influencing what was happening to me over a course of 20 years. I can't say right now if I got off my medicine that I wouldn't be level. I'm not going to take that chance.
Right.
But I think I give the glory to God in my relationship with Jesus Christ and the way that he's transformed me and how I view my life now. And it's the purpose that I've been wanting my whole life. It was just like I was so arrogant and ungrateful for this gift that God had given me before, just because of these external circumstances that happened in my life, that I just stopped caring. And what I've learned now, it's very important, that ties to this church, is I always had a problem with church. Even when I got out of treatment, I was here, I was like, I don't really want to go to church. Like, let my relationship be a personal thing with God. Church isn't really a priority. And then I was like, you just got to start going. And it wasn't even necessarily that I needed to start meeting people here. It was just like, the more I read the Bible, it was like things like a baptism where like
I never come up.
Like I've always been like against like institutional ceremonial stuff, and I was like, baptism's stupid. But I was like, well, if I'm gonna follow this Bible, like and I'm gonna adhere to the Word, I gotta start taking these things seriously. Because a big part of it, what I started to realize is like the people that I surrounded myself with when I was early in my faith, they were not a good support system.
More consistent.
And so then I fell apart. And so then I realized, like why fellowship and discipleship and all that stuff's super important. One day I was working out at Crunch Fitness. I'd been going to another church for a little while.
Well, can I rewind you a little bit? So you went to treatment for 90 days, and then what happened with the court stuff? Is it over? Or
yeah, so... Yeah, let's talk about that. Well, okay, so yeah, it's
because you like went to jail and then they took you from jail.
Yeah, so I went to treatment, and then once I got out, they kept pushing my court date back. My lawyers kept doing that.
Yeah, and
by this time, the statute of limitations for intoxicated manslaughter did pass, but I had turned myself in beforehand. They could have charged me with that at any point. They decided not to for whatever reason. In my opinion, it's because there were no witnesses at the scene. The accident was like 3:08 in the morning, and it was at an intersection. So I don't think they knew who ran a red light. Mm-hmm. The police report said I was going 70 and a 30. So I think that
based on the damage to the vehicles,
the skid mark of the brakes. They can do a test on that. And so my feeling probably is that I fell asleep. And that makes sense why my leg broke, like it did. I eventually go to court. At first they were they were saying, we don't think it's going to be upgraded to a felony. At that point, it was a second misdemeanor. I had gotten 1 DWI in college. And I just was amazed. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, there's a fatality. And just the way the whole court system was, it was like, this is like scary, a very scary soft landing that I know myself don't deserve. Mm-hmm. And it's been the story of my life. And like, it's ever present in my brain. Like, don't you dare do what you've done your whole life and just like set this aside and go back to your road to destruction. Like it was this time, it was like, no,
it's a cross point.
You've done something to a family, and then not even to mention the lie that I had become. Like I became this hugely dishonest person. In my mind, it was via omission, so it wasn't as bad, but it was just, I really had a hard time dealing with myself, which I worked on. So, and I'm always going to be working on. But anyway, so we have the final court date, and it goes from, I think it was like 30 days in jail to 7 days in jail to no days in jail. And I was like, this is wild. And they gave me a 1.5 probation. They gave me like 6 months of a driver's license suspended, which apparently I had already served, so I haven't had a license suspended at all. I know I was driving with a suspended license back around when it happened, but not now. And then I have a breathalyzer in my car. I had a breathalyzer in my car, will be there till December, I think. And I had an ankle monitor around my ankle for 6 months, I want to say. 3 months in treatment and 3 months when I was out. Mm-hmm. And so the big thing about the court date was they were going to allow for what's called an allocution, that's where the victim's family comes and talks. I wasn't going to be allowed to say anything, but I had to sit there and take it.
Yeah.
And so this lady, I'll say her name because I think her name needs to be said. Her name is Linda Cadena. She passed away, and she was 59 years old. She had 3 kids, and 2 of her daughters showed up, and I want to say 8 to 10 of her grandchildren. It's devastating. Mm. And so I'm there sitting across the court aisle. My dad's there with me and my lawyer, and I hear the kids like, is that him? Is that the guy? And I'm just like frozen, just taking all this in. Like, there's nothing I can do. And I deserve all this. I deserve whatever they think about me. I deserve whatever's about to come. And so her 2 daughters go up to the front, and I think 2 grandchildren. And the craziest thing happened. I'm going to paraphrase all this, but they were basically like, we thought we should hate you, but we wish the best for you. We wish that you don't make this mistake again and that you have success in your life. And then one of the daughters said, we do recover, which is a saying. She was in prison for meth the night that she heard that her mom passed away. And so she never got to say goodbye to her. And so I'm sitting there watching. I'm just sobbing, man. Like,
oh, man. It's about got me right now.
It was, and that was another example of God's grace.
Definitely.
It's like, I was like, I got to make this count, like, and I was just like, I'm sorry, like, I just felt terrible. And they're all just crying. And then that was it, that was the end of that. And I guess that provides them some kind of closure. I don't really know. But it doesn't excuse from what I have done. I want to hold myself to their wishes and try to be successful, never make the same mistake again. And I'm still trying to figure out what God's will is for my life, but I know a big part of it is what happened with me. A big part of it is getting on here and talking about it because man, like even to this day, like I talk with Steck about doing prison ministry and stuff, and I feel like that's where my passion is, and I deserve so much worse, man. I don't understand why I'm here. I don't understand why I'm alive. I've had too many close calls. I should be in prison. I don't understand it all. And even it's still I have a hard time being like, well, God blessed me with this, because it's like, man, I'm a wretch. I've been a wretch, you know. It's hard for me to understand it, except for it's God's mercy, and it's not about me.
We all want justice until it's time for us to pay the piper, and then we want mercy.
Yeah.
And same thing I said to Stack. You know, I believe that you and Stack and I have a lot in common. You know, I think some of the things that I've done and that have happened to me were terrible, but I've been able to sit across from people that were hurting, that didn't understand, that didn't want to live, and have a conversation with them and go, hey, I've been where you are, you know?
Right.
And your story is powerful for no matter what side of addiction you're on.
Yeah.
And I think it'll touch people.
And that's what, like, I really, and it's like, it's crazy because I finally found a purpose, and it's like what Steck said, becoming death to yourself, and serving God and serving others. And that's, I feel that fulfillment from doing that, with just being outside of outside of myself, like getting away from this stupid brain, you know? And so I'm really grateful that I'm where I'm at. And what I was about to get to before I talked about the disposition of the case is, so I was working out at Crunch Fitness, and I wasn't really this was towards when the case was getting resolved. And I remember I met these two guys in the sauna, and you know them, Ryan Johnson and David Pedro.
Nah, those losers.
And we just started connecting, talking about Jesus, and
just three dudes in the
three
sauna.
Dudes in the sauna.
Talking about Jesus.
Nothing wrong with that. And so I met them, and I was really struck by how confident and open about their faith with just people in the sauna and strangers and stuff. And that's like where I was in my faith right then. Like, I was definitely keeping to myself, but I was like, I'm ready to tell a story. I remember I talked to him, I had the ankle monitor on, and I was, you know, the first thing I told them at least for David, I told him about what happened in my accident. And I told him a little bit about myself, and he was like, well, can you do marketing? And I was like, are you serious, dude? I just basically told you I'm the worst person. Like, I was so dishonest. And it was just, wow, it was definitely like, I felt like a divine intervention thing. And so I've worked with him. I've been working with them since. Just great stand-up dudes. But more importantly is they led me to this church. He told me about Freedom Weekend. And through them, I've met a community that I'm just starting to scratch the surface with, that I'm like, these are real ass dudes, you know, like these are real strong people. Before this all happened, I didn't know what month to month, I was like, still, I might go to jail. So like, I didn't have a plan. I didn't know if I was going to get a felony on my record and if I wasn't going to be employable again. It's like all these questions. I didn't know where I was going to live, but it's like, never was I like, I'm going to stay in Tyler. But now it's like I found my home here.
Right.
You know, like I found people that I really feel strongly about getting to know. And man, it's just a beautiful thing. I feel like, it's just crazy. I'm 39. I've been sober. I lost 75 pounds in the past year and a half. And I feel like I'm like, almost like mid-20s. Like I feel alive again, and I'm just pumped because I'm not gonna let this opportunity go to waste. Like I know that, and it's really the term eternal life is really something that's sticking out to me lately, because the kingdom of heaven is here and now. Eternal life is life to the fullest right here, not just the life after. And so, man, I'm just grateful. I'm grateful for everything. I'm grateful for my mistakes. I'm grateful for the path that led me here. And it's hard to say that. I'm grateful for both of you guys being on this podcast. And, you know, Travis has talked about it, this being a big year for wilderness. And some of that might be some, you know, marketing from a pastor, but I really believe it. I take it to heart. I think it is going to be a big year if we put in the work and we let it. You know what I mean? And I think this podcast is going to be a big part of it. I really do. So yeah, well, that's pretty much my story.
Well, we're glad you got your eyebrows back.
They're pretty bushy.
Grew in great, like.
Yeah, dude. A lot of people shave them off and they just don't come back.
They don't come back. Like, it's kind of crazy because, like, when you were telling about when you were in jail and everything and how you were just going crazy, like, I remember the first time I met you. And that was at a sales meeting for a construction company, and I'm pretty sure I was late to it, but that's beside the point. But you brought Whataburger for everybody. And for whatever reason, like, I didn't know that you and David were, like, tight, you know what I mean? But there was something that stuck out to me, like, wow, that's a servant's heart.
It wasn't me that brought the Whataburger.
I knew it.
It was our distributor. I wasn't going to let that go by though. It wasn't me.
Still, you brought it, and you know, and you accepted the gratitude from David in the meeting. So yeah, it all works out and comes old. Even, you know, whenever you don't deserve the mercy and the grace from God, you know, we kind of see those things show up.
I don't think we get to pick what we get the mercy for.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah,
and geez, that's a gift.
His mercies are made new every day.
And if you're really actively trying to find God's will, He'll put you to use.
Well, and this was something that I listened to that stuck with me when you were talking about predestination.
Oh yeah,
because it's crazy to me, because it's like, why does God choose this thing for this person? And it's such there's so many variables involved, you know what I mean? But no matter what I was going to do, God knows what I'm going to do. It's not going to affect his will. He sees a bird's eye view of the whole thing, and then he's going to his will still will be done. It's like, it could be through this way or whatever. But it's beyond my comprehension to understand, like, why I got spared, why I'm not in jail for the rest of my life. Because it's like, there's all these things that it's like, I did the same thing that hundreds of thousands of people have done over the course of history, and they received a different fate. I try to not think about it too much, because a big thing about what I've learned through treatment and AA and mindfulness is trying to be in the present moment. It's not to dwell too much on the past and not to worry too much. They call it future tripping, you know, about the future. It's like, and I think a lot of the drug and alcohol abuse was trying to speed up the present, or trying to slow down the present, or trying to warp your grasp of the present. And now I do find a peace in the present. That's really what I do my best to focus on. I mean, we all have anxiety about things that are coming ahead, or regrets about what happened. But I've always been, throughout my life, I was a very arrogant person who thought I could kind of get away with anything, and then it burned me. And so God definitely right-sized me and hit me with a heavy dose of humility that I needed. And so I'm just glad I'm still alive while I was able to learn that lesson and hopefully do something with it, you know.
At a pretty young age, I don't know how to explain this. I always kind of knew that something was a little different about me. Later, you know, when I got into recovery, people said, "Hey, man, you're not terminally unique." But I definitely felt like I was a striped horse or something. Then when I found AA, and then when I found Crossbrand, when I found Wilderness, it was like I found the rest of the striped horses, and they were like, "We're zebras." And I was like, "Oh, I wondered why all the other horses didn't have stripes," you know. And I wonder if you kind of have. I think you were kind of getting at that, you know, that it's like you bumped into those guys and ended up here, and it feels like home. To me, it's like the people that are here feel like home. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because like it's the same feeling at Tyler Hartwig's house or at Travis's house, or you know, if somebody swings by my place, like it feels the same to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's interesting. I think when I was little, like church was the place that I went, and that felt good. But it wasn't home.
It didn't feel like natural.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Even I could look at like my past marriage, and I remember like towards the end of it trying to actively find things to do other than go home. And like, dude, like if I had a choice, I would just be at home right now with my wife. You know, like my current wife, I just want to be with her because it's peace. And I think that's kind of here. It's there's this thing like we listen and we don't judge there on TikTok or whatever. Like, I think that really happens here. Like legit.
Yeah. Because I think, you know, I think a lot of churches, you know, you kind of clean up to go there, and then you don't really kind of hold on to that identity otherwise. And I think there's definitely something disarming here about the realness of it. But also for me, it's like the person I was in Austin and I was a short time before this, I was in a completely different crowd, and I was a completely different mindset. It's crazy because it's like even my concept of God and Jesus right now is not different. It's different than my understanding was when I was younger, and even different than it was a couple years ago and stuff. But it seems like a lot of the people here operate on like a very similar wavelength when it comes to the understanding of just how that all works, at least in my mind. And I maybe it's like the modern culture that we're in, where we have a lot of access to different podcasts and information. But it seems like we're in this, like in general as a society, not only that people are coming back to Christ, but there's like a deeper understanding that I feel like I grasp. Maybe it's just what my focus is on now, but it's just a good time.
I would definitely say that the culture that we're in, you know, Travis touched on it this past Sunday a little bit, and talking about like we've just had some of the biggest podcasts like putting out the name of Jesus now, having guests on who can actually defend the faith. Because I know whenever we were growing up, it seemed like everybody was making fun of Christians, like in Hollywood, within the culture, like everywhere.
That was a punching bag.
Yeah. And now I think that reality has really set in. Like you see the guys like Richard Dawkins and, you know, Christopher Hitchens, all the big atheist know-it-alls, like they're
kind of backing down.
They're out. Like they're out of the picture.
mean, Dawkins is a philosophical Christian.
Yeah, cultural Christian.
Whatever that means.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Whenever you start to see, like, I mean, I was listening to the, have y'all listened to that most recent Joe Rogan podcast? Bro, so freaking good.
Who's it with?
It's with
Wes Huff.
Okay, I remember y'all were talking about, who's that one guy?
Billy Carson.
Billy Carson.
Yeah. He come out there and, like, he gave a genuine, honest defense of the faith. He used a lot of big words that I'm even having to go back and look up. But
that's unbelievable,
right? Like, even I was like kind of like, whoa, that's a new one. But you know, we didn't have that whenever we were kids, and I'm really excited to see the things that the culture is putting out that is just talking about Jesus in some way. Like, we don't have to have the big podcast that, you know, just has 1 million people listening and they all become believers and all that. Like, just start making steps to put God into your life. And, you know, whenever you came here, I think it's funny also that you were surprised that you're excited to be living in Tyler. Like, that was I was shocked. Like, whenever I got my apartment here in Tyler, I was like, this is not even close to the plan that I had for my life.
Sure. Yeah.
But I'm so happy about it.
Right.
And I'm so thankful about it first and foremost, because, you know, I shouldn't be here in any way, shape, or form. Yet the goodness of God is something that pursues us that we can't even begin to understand. So,
right.
You know, whenever we start to think, like, you know, about our past mistakes and all that kind of stuff, now I used to not think about that, or I used to overdwell on it. You know what I mean? Like I would just like be the whipping horse, and I'd be like, you know, everybody should just hate me because I used to be a drug addict,
right.
a sex addict, and all this stuff. And now I'm like, the goodness of God is what has come out from all of my mishaps.
Right.
And it's not because of anything that I've done. It's because of his riches and mercies that are made every day.
I mean, you gotta take the step.
Yeah,
you know?
definitely.
You gotta ask. You gotta believe in Jesus died for your sins and rose from the dead. You gotta ask the Holy Spirit into your heart. You know, like there's some things you do have to do. And once you do that and you put your life in God's hands, you ask God to direct your thinking and your acting, then he can take your mess and make it into something that will help people.
It's funny.
Thank you for
it's funny that like the biggest action you have to do is almost inaction. It's surrender.
Yeah.
Which is what I had to do. The one thing I wanted to hit on that I thought was so it was like right when I was out of treatment and I was doing AA here, and I had a sponsor who drove me a little crazy, but he said one thing that really stuck with me. I remember there was one point he like wanted me to write down 25 things that I was like happy about with myself. And I put somewhere on there that like I picked myself up when I fell down, meaning like I decided to do something about the predicament I was in. He's like, you didn't do that, Jesus did that. And I remember this was still when I was like getting back into my faith, and I had a hard point with that, and that was my arrogance still like hanging on, like no, I physically did it, like I played a part and God played a part, but I played a part. And I don't feel that way now, and I'm really grateful to that man that he told me that, and he checked me where I needed to, because you know, one thing I pray for every single day is that I'm a vessel for God's will, that I'm just an instrument, you know. And God did, that voice that was telling me here and there, like, you need to, you know, the good direction, the good decisions I made were not because of me, because I would have probably just, you know, let things corrode. But God definitely gets all the glory. Oh, there was one other thing I wanted to say when you were talking about the culture of Christianity. So even before all the accident happened and all that stuff, what was crazy, and it ties in with what y'all were talking about with Casey last night, with God unleashing his wrath on those deities, you know. What really started to get me to come back around to the possibility of God was getting into conspiracy theories and seeing how potentially evil the world is. And eventually it went from like everything could be relative, like moral relativism, like nihilism, whatever, to like, if this stuff really does happen, like there has to be a counterpoint that is greater than that, because we're still living and progressing, you know, like there's got to be a good that triumphs over evil, and that's the way I looked at it. But what goes with that, with the cultural aspect, is if you look back at like these conspiracy theories, you go back to even like 2012 and stuff, not the Mayan thing, but the actual year. It's like there is a trail of like 3 years or so, which like the stuff that seemed like the Epstein Island stuff, like I remember I knew about that stuff around like 2012, and like there ends up being this like buy-in once it comes to the surface level of like cultural consciousness, which to me it's like, this is good triumphing over evil, like before our eyes, you know. And it's those idols and those deities, like the celebrity culture with Diddy and all that. It's like that stuff's collapsing because the dark will eventually be brought to the light. And it's always exciting when I see that, because then it helps me reaffirm my faith, you know, like there is a guiding moral good by the ultimate creator.
Yeah.
Well, last night my wife sent me this deal. Riley Gaines posted a TikTok, and she sent it to Travis, and then Travis talked to me about it this morning. Have y'all seen it? She's okay. I'm gonna play this for y'all.
There is a big shift happening around the country, and I'm not talking about a political shift. I'm talking about a spiritual one. Have you seen the long list of coaches and players who are declaring their faith and giving glory to God and praising Jesus Christ during the college football playoffs and all of the different bowl games? Head coach of Liberty University, Jamie Chadwell, wore this shirt yesterday during their bowl game. But it's not just Christian schools who are making a bold stand in their faith. Here's Boise State's head coach, Spencer Danielson.
Thank you, Jesus. And I mean, Jesus deserves all the glory. I mean, we serve a champion. He died on the cross, but he rose again 3 days later. That's the God I serve, man. Anything's possible.
Wow. And listen to the emotional statement from a Boise State defensive end about Coach Danielson's impact.
I want to start off and say, all glory to Jesus Christ. He's the true champion. Coach D, you changed my life. You changed my life. I did not know God until I got to Boise State. And I serve a true champion. Jesus Christ is the only true God. He died, rose from the dead 3 days later. That's the champion that I serve. And thank you, Coach D. Like, seriously, you changed my life.
Following their playoff game last week, the Texas Longhorn running back asked the Arizona State running back if he could pray for him.
That's beautiful.
Here's the University of Texas quarterback.
Relationship with Jesus has helped me in that specific way of knowing that no matter what happens, that he's going to be there for me. He's still going to love me. You know, prayer is very powerful, and I really believe in prayer. And it's just been cool to see how Jesus and God have just worked in our lives throughout this year. And I think that is also a testament to how we stay level-headed and poised throughout the entirety of a game.
And here's the University of Texas defensive back.
You know, last year and the years before previously, I wanted things done on my time. But it doesn't work like that. You know, God has everything planned. It's already written. Psalms 105, verse 1, just give thanks to the Lord and proclaim his greatness and show the whole world what he has done. I mean, I'm showing y'all with my talent, but, I mean, I'd be surprised, too, when God just pushes me and go out there to allow me to make plays like that. So
Notre Dame quarterback.
What this win means to you.
Yeah, first and foremost, I want to thank my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Without him, I wouldn't be here, and we wouldn't be here as a whole group.
Ohio State quarterback.
First and foremost, I got to thank my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, you know, for giving me this opportunity to be on this stage and here in the Rose Bowl. I mean,
Ohio State running back had this eye black on with Romans 3:22 written on it. You feel it too, right? I mean, this shift that's happening right before our very eyes. It is easy in this world to feel down and depressed and hopeless, especially with even recent events that have gone on around the country and really globally. But these young men acknowledging their Lord and their Savior, declaring their lives to him, I feel more hopeful and encouraged than I've felt in a really long time. Which reminds me of Jesus' words in Matthew 10:32. He says, for whoever acknowledges me in front of others, I will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. God is moving more of this in 2025, please. There is a big shift.
There's a couple comments I want to make about that I think are pretty interesting. So some of those were obviously said during live games, but some of them were during like press conferences. So I think it's interesting that the media companies are choosing to air those, because they could easily be like, we're not going to air that. And you guys probably feel the way that I do about media companies, is they aren't really necessarily on God's side. That's one point. The other point that I feel like is the people, like, so say, let me use this example of like an award show, like the Grammys or the Oscars or whatever. You'd have people that thank God, and that's kind of not really a big deal. But when you have Jesus Christ's name invoked, there's the power behind that. Because people pray to different gods. And so a lot of times they might not be necessarily praying to the God of the Bible when they say God, but when you invoke the name of Jesus Christ, it's like, demons flee. And there is such a power behind that. And so I'm fired up when I see people openly talking like that. You know
about
what I mean?
Jesus.
I mean, I think the word revival is not far off.
Yeah.
I think the things that we're seeing, like we're talking about a movement we feel here, we're talking about something we're seeing locally, regionally. Man, I think what we're seeing is global.
The whole battle with, principalities and stuff, it's a real thing. And I think people, once they started seeing, like, and I'm not getting into politics because I'm still, like, kind of on my own island about that, but I saw, I felt like people thought that the country was falling off a cliff, and it's not just the country. It's like the world's in such a crazy place, but it's like I'm starting to see things like feel like they are turning, and the only thing I can say to that is it's in correlation with people returning to faith.
Yeah.
It's not about any elected leader. It's nothing about that. I feel like it's about people's faith in Jesus Christ.
I think it's a testament of the church growing arms and legs again. Because it seems like the church has just had butts in their pews for a long time.
And diminishing butts
Exactly. Now the church has really been getting a lot of volumes from people who are in the social media space. I mean, George Janko, I mean, you can go right down the list. And then you've also got people who have been devout atheists. I mean, you look at Russell Brand.
Right.
I mean, that dude
amazing.
was wild.
Blows
like,
my mind.
Whenever I was a believer, like, he gave me the heebie-jeebies.
Right.
Like, every time
we were talking about him the other day, and Travis is like, he's probably baptizing somebody right now.
Yeah, probably, yeah. And to see that, because, like, whenever he came to faith, in my own mind, I'm like, that's skeptical.
I mean, that OnlyFans girl,
right? Like
that OnlyFans girl was on that whatever podcast and talking about, I cheat on everybody or whatever, and then boom.
It's like, what ulterior motive might this person have? Or, like, in my mind, it's like, what part of the grand conspiracy are they trying to, like, flip on me now? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But I think, I don't know, like, to me, it's like, if you are somebody like a Russell Brand and you're reaching this many people, and if you are mocking God, but you are turning people into believers, he's still using that for his greater glory.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean? And whenever you start to inspect the fruit, I think another thing that the church is kind of, I wouldn't say the church has dropped it, but the culture of the world doesn't inspect fruit. We don't look at the things that we're viewing actually produces. And whenever you stop and actually start thinking about the things that you're consuming into your life, that's whenever things that you start seeing happen, you're like, I don't want anything to do with that. And that's when change starts to influence you.
Yeah.
And I do believe that the Holy Spirit works in that, because all things are for the good and glory for those who love Him.
The culture shifted a couple of times. If we rewind a little bit, go back to the 60s, 70s, liberals were talking about freedom of choice, freedom of their body, freedom of expression. Well, liberals 4 years ago were like, they're saying my body, my choice, but then they're like, you better take the vaccine. So it's real confusing, They're like, everything the government says is right. I'm like, whoa.
Where have y'all been?
That's not a classical liberal thought.
Exactly. Yeah.
What are we doing?
Right.
And I think, I was watching, Bill Maher had a clip I saw or something on TikTok the other day. And
his transformation's kind of crazy.
Dude, he's like, what do you mean you can go to the women's bathroom if you're a man? He's like, what is wrong with y'all? I'm like, dude, I thought when I was in high school, Bill Maher was as left as it got.
Yeah.
And now he's
even Michael Moore, super left guy. He called it the first time Trump was elected. He was like, Trump's going to get elected, and they're like, no way. And he's like, dude, are y'all not seeing? See, I think the East Coast, West Coast, and maybe the Third Coast, some little small cities in Houston and Austin, maybe. They're so disconnected with these rich white people, or, elitist people are so disconnected with what really is going on in everyday America.
Well, I think that election it showed even so many people that were in disbelief about the support for Trump. It's like, oh my God, the media is really lying to us, because it's like they're not like they were completely telling a different
narrative. I was watching the election results come in. I'm like, dang, Trump lost.
Yeah,
because they were so negative.
Each other,
yeah.
You were like, I think he lost Virginia.
Yeah.
And I was like, nah, dude, not what I want. Because,
they tried to attack us, dude. That COVID deal was a 100% attack. They tried to shut the churches down. And, I came to Wilderness during that time off and on. And, I remember Travis coming out and going, it appears like 99.9% of the people in the age group of this church survived this little flu thing. Mm-hmm. He's like, I'll see y'all next Sunday. Yeah. And thank God
I wish I was
for
around
that.
for that.
Bro, oh, dude.
Imagine me being somebody who never believed in the vaccine or anything, and I worked in the film industry in Austin. I was like a pariah.
Dude, I still go places and people are wearing masks. I'm like, what are we doing?
I roll my eyes at least 15 times out the back of my head whenever I see that.
I was like, within a few days, they have all this PPE stuff and all these signs in stores. This wasn't. These
my favorite plexiglass walls. I was
I've
like a fence in the middle of a yard or something without or like a gate in the middle of a yard.
Yeah. I was like, I've worked in a warehouse and seen how distribution works. There's no way they just start producing all this. This stuff was sitting in warehouses.
Yeah, definitely.
But to go back about what you're talking about with the churches nowadays, it's crazy because recently our cultures, it's evolved from materialism to hyper materialism to almost this digitalism. So it's this materialism that doesn't really exist. It's this fantasy.
Yeah, because we're all sick of the clutter of stuff. Right, we don't want stuff. But we had stuff in the 80s and 90s.
But it's still vanity in it. Right. And it goes along with what y'all were talking about yesterday, where it goes from atheism to really worship of self. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of people, the reaction of what's happening is they're seeing how flimsy all this is, how you can only have a tenuous grasp on this stuff, and so it goes from what was a church that had complacency to now there's a desperation,
right? Because
it's finally
it's like desperosity.
Yeah, and people are finally having something tangible to grasp onto, and I think there is this there's this mass awakening that's starting to happen, and it's God just doing what God's going to do, because eventually those things that people try to hang on to, and it seems like it's cyclical, and our culture has the evil powers that be have a good job of us forgetting about the past and trying to make it seem like it's going to be a new era and stuff, but God's always 10 steps ahead of the game.
Yeah. Well, if you look to your left and your right, wherever you live, chances are both of those people on either side of you voted for Trump. Mm-hmm. Statistically, the way things worked out. And I think the problem is, what I was going to say earlier, is this non-religious ruling class of magicians or whatever, in the highly populated areas, they don't go to church. Yep. We come here, we have disagreements with people. We know what's going on in other people's families. The pollsters don't know.
Right.
They don't really know. They only talk to each other. They live in Washington, D.C. They get coffee from the same place.
Right.
They don't know.
Well, that's the funny thing about the internet and stuff, because it was originally devised as a control mechanism, and then
freedom.
Yeah, freedom evolved from that, and it's the more that information spreads, it's
I thought Al Gore invented the internet.
Right.
Right. He may have invented global warming.
No, but it's just funny because it's all these little mechanisms they keep trying to throw into place to control their little facade of power. It's
it's not going to work. It's not going to.
The one I saw most recently, I think there's a documentary, or it might be online. I don't think you can get it on Netflix, but it's explaining how. Damn, I forgot what it's called. Pokemon Go, how that was some giant funded experiment by the NSA or
probably
the CIA or something.
I believe it.
Dealing with geotracking and stuff.
Yes.
Probably.
Yeah. Yep. But the left. Even some of the boomers on the right that watch Fox News are like, oh, that's crazy. The government wouldn't do that. Have you heard about the Tuskegee experiments?
Right.
Did you read any of the history, any of the writings of what we actually knew was going to happen? We knew Pearl Harbor was going to happen. Yeah. They planned for it, and then they moved some of the ships out and let it happen. You're telling me that Building 11 fell because an airplane hit a building 3 blocks away?
Yeah.
Get out of here.
But the term that with that stuff that's always interesting is the cognitive dissonance. If it's going to be something that that tests your foundational belief system.
Where's the fuselage in the Pentagon, bud?
Yeah.
Tell me a whole 747 hit that thing.
If if it goes against like your core basis, you just see people glitch out like they're
I mean, they're like non-playable characters, you know, like
NPCs.
It's just like driving in Tyler. I'm like, really? Like, are we driving a car? Or are you doing your makeup, eating your food, and FaceTiming somebody? What are we doing?
Oh, that guy's always in the store behind the counter, no matter what.
Man, Troy, what a story. I hope it blesses some people. I hope y'all were like not driving when you listen to some of it. Yeah, like, dude.
That was amazing. That really blessed me so much.
Yeah, and we'll have to get you to help us figure out how to bring video into this because I'm treading water here, editing audio, you know?
Yeah, I think it would be awesome.
Yeah, we just got your official resume, bro. What the heck? You're in.
I'm always looking for new creative projects to be involved in. I think a video component will definitely add something. And yeah, man, absolutely. Any way I can help y'all guys. I appreciate y'all listening to me. I was worried that I was going to bawl through the whole thing, and
you almost got me 2 times now on this podcast. Like 2 or 3 times, I've almost lost it.
Bro, got me. Ain't no 2 ways about it. You definitely got me.
Man, all praise be to God, and I will say this to anybody: just don't even take any kind of chance with any alcohol in your system driving, because if you were to get in an accident and you weren't at fault, and that's there as a contributing factor, you're probably in trouble. And I'll also say this, like, I drove drunk hundreds of thousands of times.
Yeah.
Like, messed up out of my gourd. But the most common theme with me was, like, I got a hold of this. I got a grasp on this. And I was very cocky in that regard. But that night when I got in my accident, I don't think I even knew. I just had something in my subconscious that was like, you can drive. And so when you make something a habit like that and you get to the point that you don't even know what you're doing, you don't know what can happen. So I don't mean to be preachy, but
Preach.
nobody could ever convince me.
It's not worth the risk to your life or anybody else's.
There's Ubers and all kinds of stuff. Don't be a terrible person like I was. Like, think about the other people that are out there. That's all I gotta say.
If you're struggling with alcohol or drugs, there's a for sure thing that you can do to help yourself. Like, you're going to reach out to somebody.
Talk to me.
Yeah, 100%. You know, send us a message on Facebook or something. We're plugged in. So, And that's another episode of Two Dudes, One God Pod. Next week we have Louis Blanc, PhD. Super interesting guy, South African, living here in Texas, planting churches in Africa. So it's going to be a wild podcast, I already know.
Sounds exciting.
All right, y'all. We'll see you next week. Have a good one.
Thanks, guys.
God bless.